Hi everyone, it's Ren here. I hope you're doing well, guys. In this video, I'm going to return to the differences between INFJ and INTJ. But before that, just to remind you that if you're interested in supporting my work as a writer in the vein of Hess, Dostoevsky, Camus, Kafka, and all these great writers, psychological fiction, for pretty moderate price, the links are down below. Thank you. So, the last video I made was a video about, how to tell if you're an INTJ or an INFJ in 5 minutes. I made it in 6 minutes, but I hope you'll forgive me for that. Now, I think the reception for that video was quite positive, but I had some interesting comments on it, very thoughtful comments, and one of the comments, I believe, coming from someone who is likely to be INTJ according to their assessments, based on maybe some inputs from my video. That person said that in order to be completely certain, they needed to have some specification as regarding, the content of my analysis, and more specifically, they asked, they asked me indirectly to define the difference between what would you call it, between what is right and what is correct. And just to give you a reminder, in case you have not seen the previous video, what I said in that video is that both the INFJ and the INTJ have a vision. Now, this vision doesn't have to be articulated in words. It's more something that guides their lives and propels them forward. They have a way of conceiving of their life as oriented toward the goal, even though they may not exactly know what that goal is. So that's a key. The dominant function is obviously key to a person's type and constitution, but it's not enough to determine your type. Now, on the basis of that vision, I said that the INTJ will act on the basis of what's right and will test it against the world, against the real world. Can what's right about the vision, as informing the vision, be validated by real world experience? And what I said was that in contrast, INFJs have a vision that is guided by what is correct, and they will test it by seeing whether that correctness is essentially validated by connecting with other people. So you have the TI and FE kind of coordinated, as opposed to the INTJ is T and FI. Now, it is true that on paper, to some people, it might not be clear, it might not be obvious what the difference is between what is right and the difference and what is correct. So what is right, INFJs, what is correct, INFJs. Now, the difference, as I conceive of it, is the following. Perhaps to understand better what I mean by, the what is right of tertiary FI, it would be better to say what feels right. I think that, if you think of the difference between what feels right and what is correct, the distinction, I think you will grasp as immediately obvious. Because the problem is, correct in this case has only one sense. You understand it straight away intuitively. You wouldn't say what feels correct. I mean, you could say that in certain circumstances, but typically you wouldn't say, oh, that feels correct, you say what feels right and what is correct. So what feels right, it's a moral value, it's a moral conviction. So it's not really such a conviction in the INTJ's FI as to be really questioned, in a sense, by anyone else, right? So, which is why, when an INTJ is guided by certain very strong principles, it's almost impossible to convince them to steer clear of those principles, to dismiss those principles. It's almost impossible. One reason is that they're stubborn, of course, but it's not really the issue. The first main issue is that a lot of the time they're not even conscious exactly of what those moral motivations are. So it's impossible to convince someone to, get rid of a particular moral motivation if they're not even really aware that they have them. And that's part of the tertiary side of things. You're less conscious of the manifestations of your tertiary and inferior function, and you're conscious of the manifestation of your dominant and auxiliary. So the first is that they're not always conscious, but also it's part of their makeup. It's part of how they justify their own existence at the end of the day. And so it's very, very important to them. So it's very dear to them, and they feel threatened if you call that into question. To them, there's still a need to test whether those moral convictions are, grounded. They won't admit, of them to be questioned by other people, but they will admit of the real world. They will admit of the real world to test it. And in the case of the real world here, I'm not talking about the real world of people, because you could argue, well, the real world involves real people, but the people are something in addition to the world in a way. The real world is objective. Now, there are objectively people in the world, but people carry subjectivities within them. Okay? So what the INTJ will do is test, the validity of their moral convictions, not by opening them up for discussion with other people, with other subjectivities. That they will not do. But they will engage with the objective world, and that's the TE side of things. Because in their view, the outside world, the objective world, it doesn't have a subjectivity. So they're willing to engage with that and see if their vision can be made to fit with that. Now, in the case of the INFJ, it's very different. It's very different because, and I know it sounds a little strange and it sounds a little contradictory if you have a basic understanding of the INFJ type, to say that INFJs are not driven by what feels right. But it's true, basically. I mean, as far as I can tell, based on my research and my self-research as well, like INFJs, of course, can be very moral people, but they are not motivated in the most primal sense by what feels right. They're concerned to make sure that, what they promote as part of their vision, what guides their vision, they want to make sure that it is well-founded, well-grounded, that it makes sense, that it is correct, that it is valid, okay? And they want to be sure of that at the basis, and that's the TI side of things. And you can see that in some well-known INFJs, because the TI, just like symmetrically to the INTJ's FI, because the TI of the INFJ is tertiary, again, it can be strong in the sense that the manifestations can be quite prevalent and compelling in the case of some INFJs, but it's not the most conscious function, and so it's hard for an INFJ to question their own use of TI in a way, okay? So again, very symmetrical to the INTJ's FI. You can see that in a philosopher like Ludwig Wittgenstein, for example. If you're familiar with him, he's most likely an INFJ, and he was very developed TI, but if you look carefully at his use of TI, it's kind of, he's very fascinated by TI, he's very immersed in his TI, like the TI child of the typical INFJ, but at the same time, his TI itself, although very potent in many ways, is not that flexible, and that's because he's not as conscious of it as he would be conscious of his other, more upper functions, if you like. And that's the case in a lot of INFJs. But INFJs are very concerned with having correct beliefs. Okay? Now those beliefs can be moral beliefs, but they will pay close attention to the to the internal consistency of those beliefs. So INTJs, they don't care as much about that. What feels right, they're very confident that that's what should be tested against the real world. With an INFJ, there's this extra step where they first have to engage with the internal structure of the beliefs and see whether they are happy with the consistency of those beliefs. And once that's sort of settled in their heads, then they go out and they test those against not the objective world primarily, but the world of people. In other words, instead of engaging with the objective world in this case and testing against the objective world, they test against the subjectivities of other people, and the more people they can compel and convince that, their vision is correct and rightly guided, well, the more they will tend to be confident in it and expand it. And you know, when that happens, it can become quite difficult to make an INFJ change their mind, because they will tend to say, look, there are all these people that agree with me, that I have engaged with in an as honest a way as possible, and that has been the result. So, you know, and if that's the case, it will be hard to make them change their mind, in the same way that it will be hard to make an INTJ change their mind if they sense that the real world, the objective world in this case, is speaking for the success of their enterprise. You know, it would be very difficult to convince Elon Musk that his enterprise is wrong when it's been crowned with so much success. And in the same way, you know, if you have an influential, charismatic INFJ leader, you know, and maybe you don't agree with all their beliefs and what they promote, it'd be very hard to convince them otherwise if they have this big following. Now, let me know what you think in the comments, guys, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Bye-bye. Wednesday. Sorry. Bye-bye.